Hello everyone, a happy new year to you. Thanks for joining us on the first edition of Diplomatic Channel in the year 2022. I'm Teniola Shubowale. On the program this week, we review major foreign policy events around the world in the year 2021 and expectations for this year. But first, let's begin the program by taking a quick check on discussions in diplomatic circles.
A ceremony has been held in Tehran to mark the second anniversary of the U.S. assassination of top Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Speaking during the event, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Aerospace Force Commander Amir Ali Hajizadeh warned the U.S. that revenge will continue for the killing. The United States killed Soleimani, leader of the Revolutionary Guards Quds Force in Iraq on January 3, 2020, in a drone strike. Washington had accused him of masterminding attacks by Iranian-aligned militias on U.S. forces in the region. President Joe Biden has once again warned his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin that a move on the Ukraine will draw sanctions and an increased U.S. presence in Europe.
I made it clear to the President Putin that if he makes any more moves and goes into Ukraine, we will have severe sanctions. We will increase our presence in Europe with our NATO allies, and it will have to be a heavy price to pay for it.
And South Africans have bid farewell to late Archbishop Desmond Tutu at his state funeral.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu was without question a crusader in the struggle for freedom, for justice, for equality, and for peace, not only in South Africa, the country of his birth, but around the world as well.
Former Irish President Mary Robinson was one of several leaders who paid tribute to the Archbishop.
Pour out the abundance of your blessings on the Church, which he served with diligence and devotion, and use us to carry on the good work you achieved in him.
The service took place in Cape Town's St. George's Cathedral, where for years Archbishop Desmond Tutu preached against racial injustice.
The past year has brought us some of the biggest stories of our lifetimes, from the COVID-19 pandemic and the race to vaccinate the world, to the U.S. Capitol attack and the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan. The world is greeting 2022 with the harsh knowledge that major problems are not vanquished and leaders have a lot to resolve in this year. So what are these issues and how has 2021 shaped expectations for the new year? To help us unravel some of the major issues, our guest on Diplomatic Channel is Johanna LeBlanc, who is a national security and foreign policy expert. A happy new year to you and thank you for joining us on the program.
Happy New Year to you as well and the entire Channel's television family.
Thank you. So let's begin with one of the major stories of the year 2021, the chaotic Afghanistan withdrawal. Many watched in disbelief as Afghans tried to latch onto planes as foreign forces evacuated. There's been several developments to that, as we know, but one thing is certain, Afghanistan is still in a major crisis. This year, how do you see the Taliban's leadership playing out?
Well, first and foremost, what we saw last year was just heartbreaking, and it was, to some could argue that it was a failure when it comes to foreign policy. Seeing children and families trying to hang on to these helicopters, not wanting to stay in Afghanistan because of the Taliban's takeover, and just seeing how the Biden administration, withdrew from Afghanistan. But to be fair, I think either way, regardless of the strategy that was employed, I think we would have seen something similar to what we witnessed, unfortunately. But it was time. It was time for the U.S. to withdraw. It was time for the sons and daughters to come back to America. And it was also time to allow the people of Afghanistan the right to self-determination, the right to determine their future in terms of politically speaking, economically speaking, also socially speaking. But I think with the Taliban, obviously, Taliban has a really rough history in terms of human rights violations and so forth. But if the Taliban really wants to ensure Afghanistan is not a failed state and that the people of Afghanistan can truly pursue life, liberty, and happiness, the Taliban will have to adhere to international norms and to international standards in order to be recognized by the international community.
Away from the Afghanistan crisis, overall, many have said 2021 wasn't a great year for democracy. To point to one major highlight, the United States, long the champion of democracy, saw its peaceful transition of power disrupted for the first time in its history by the January 6th Capitol attack. What impact do you think that had on other countries' perception of America? And will or has the country been able to recover from that?
I think what it shows the rest of the world is that democracy is incredibly fragile. Democracy is one that needs to be constantly nurtured, and democracy everywhere could be threatened at any given moment. But what it shows to the international community is that America has incredibly strong institutions, because if what transpired last year when it comes to our presidential election had happened in most places around the world, the other party would have prevailed. And this is why it's important for governments across the world to strengthen their institutions, because when you have one individual or one institution that is weak, the other institutions needs to come and play their part, play their role. So as we are progressing, as we traverse, as we are evolving in our various democracies all over the world, it is incredibly important to make sure that there is independence within our judiciary.
Okay, speaking of the US, let's talk about its foreign policy. Its relations with China in 2021 was, as usual, frosty. With the current boycott of the Winter Olympics led by the US, what impact do you think this will have on both countries' relationship this year?
Well, the relationship has always been, as you know, crippled, right? The relationship is one about maintaining global dominance and ensuring that certain countries adhere to international norms and promote and protect the rights of citizens in a given society. So I think this decision will further strain the relationship between the two countries. But what I will tell you is that, as you see, China is doing its part as a sovereign nation. China is strengthening its alliances with countries all across the world, including the African continent, which has 55 member states. And you saw with Russia and other countries. So at some point, China is going to say, you know what, we're not going to fight you anymore. We're not going to fight this game. We're not going to play this role any longer. It is what it is, for lack of a better word. And China will do what China deems necessary for its people and to preserve its rights as a sovereign state.
All right, Johanna, we can't speak of 2021 without speaking of COVID. There was a moment in July when it seemed that the COVID-19 pandemic was ending, but things haven't worked out quite as planned, has it? And this is, largely been blamed on vaccine inequity. While many low-income countries struggle to get vaccinated, some are already contemplating the idea of a fourth dose of the vaccine. How can we end what some have called the vaccine apartheid?
This is a very nuanced question you just asked, and it's going to take me a while to answer it. But here's my take on this. One, it is quite unfortunate what we see in terms of vaccine hoarding, right? By the United States. You look at the African continent, which makes up 17% of the world's population, but roughly 5% of the population in Africa has been vaccinated. That is very problematic. And you know why? It is problematic because we saw how one infected person in Wuhan, China, a market that most of us had never been heard of, was infected. And it led to the collapse of our global economies, and it led to the death of millions of people. And if we don't address this pandemic collectively, we don't ensure that everyone is properly vaccinated, we're never going to get out of this. Because the virus will continue to mutate, right? And we will see ourselves here for another year or so. So it is incredibly important for multilateral organizations, for nations across the world, in particular, rich nations, to work in close collaboration with developing nations to ensure that they have the rights to the patents that create some of these vaccines.
All right, there's so much to unpack here, Joanna, but just final thoughts, predictions for foreign policy and diplomacy in 2022. Any major events we should look out for?
Well, 2021 was incredibly tumultuous, let me tell you. Incredibly tumultuous, from COVID-19 resurging to, unfortunately, the loss of millions of lives, to the death of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, to the death of a number of icons that we adore, that were making the world a much better place. But I think for 2022, we need to focus on the implementation of the Continental Free Trade Area, which will be a game changer for trading on the African continent, trading of countries within the continent, and looking at different countries for the development, for the economic well-being of the continent. So the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area is something that we all should be looking at. We all should be pushing to ensure that Africa can become more of an economic prosperous continent. And also, I think 2022, let's look to see what our leaders have in place for our young people. Again, I'm an advocate for young people because I believe in the young folks. I believe they are the future. I believe that governments must invest. I mean, the African continent the average age, I believe, in Africa is about 19. I mean, that is pretty severe. It's a relatively young population, right? In Nigeria, an incredibly young population as well, with a population of roughly 200 million. But the African governments must take into account the well-being and the development of its youth. It is time for the leaders to invest in the future of these young people. Because if you don't, you will not be able to reach sustainable development. And you do that through access to quality education. So not just education, quality education. You do that by ensuring that people have access to jobs. And this is why the Continental Free Trade Area is so important, because it is projected to bring millions of jobs to the African continent and essentially change the continent economic posture, right? And also, lastly, making sure that our women are protected and that there are laws on the books to protect women across the African continent, to make sure that, being a woman is not a disability. Being a woman is a plus, in my opinion, right? Because you know what they say, you train a woman, you educate a woman, you educate an entire village.
All right, that's a good place to leave it. Johanna LeBlanc, National Security and Foreign Policy Expert. Thank you so much for your thoughts on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you for having me.
And when Diplomatic Channel returns in just a moment, we shift focus to Africa in the year 2021. The year military coups returned to the stage on the continent. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us on the program. From Yoweri Museveni's re-election for a sixth term in Uganda to the death of Chadian President Idris Deby on the battlefield and the ongoing crisis in Ethiopia, 2021 was eventful for Africa. But one major thing that stood out was the rise of coups on the continent, which led to the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres to decry what he dubbed an epidemic of coup d'etats. So with all that happened in 2021, what's in store for Africa in 2022? For more on this, Confidence Makari, Security and Global Affairs Analyst, joins us now on the program. Mr. Makari, thank you so much for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year to you and your crew.
Same to you. In 2021, there were 4 successful military takeovers across Africa in Chad, Mali, Guinea and Sudan. That's up from just 1 in 2020. Why are we seeing a growing trend here?
Yeah, Africa has quite come a long way from the 1990s and into the 2000s, the decades that ushered in relative growth and prosperity for a number of the peoples on the continent. Away from the 1990s, which was dominated by civil strife, civil wars, independence struggles, political instability, and several other things. The early 2000s sort of ushered in a form of peace and stability that allowed for growth. We saw positive growth trends in places like Nigeria, Ghana, and some other countries around the continent. But unfortunately, the 2010 periods up to now, there has been a kind of a reversal in that economic growth. Nigeria has continued to have a negative economic output for some time, and it's a security challenges arising from the Boko Haram insurgency, which is entering its about 13th year this year, has largely affected its neighbors. And the inability of the Nigerian states to rein in these security challenges is beginning to spiral into other challenges that, of course, are beginning to affect the countries who share a border with Nigeria. And largely, you could find the nexus between the inability of the states, I'm talking about other states now, other countries, to keep the people safe, making people to lose trust and in the ability of the state. I mean, the state gets legitimized in the eyes of these people. And as such, when the people have lost trust in the state, the military always decide to step in as the means of restoring that trust, with the hope that they will be able to turn things around. And aside from that fact that the state, the established states as we know it, has been unable to provide security and prosperity for many citizens, there's also a nexus between recurrent coups. So the fact that most attempted coups, especially the ones that were successful, have not successfully been reversed. And so the inability of the multinational, the international community, for instance, to reverse the gains made by coup plotters means that it is a working time bomb that other people will attempt to do the same. I mean, we saw it in a place like Mali. The ECOWAS couldn't really come through for the Malian people, and then we saw the same thing attempted in Niger. But fortunately for the people of Niger, that one was put down. We saw the same thing in Chad. We saw the same thing in Sudan and several other countries. So, I mean, the reasons are interlinked. The inability of the states to improve the welfare of its people will always lead the military to want to step in and fill that particular position, and then the lack of definitive response from the international communities to reverse the gains made by coup plotters will always make sure that the trends continue.
I mean, there are a lot of elections pegged for this year on the continent. What implications would you say what we saw last year, what implication does this have for the continent, especially for the year 2022?
From what the outlook is for 2022, given the elections that we have going forward, taking them independently, I would say that the political situation on the ground in those in the countries that will be having general elections this year, especially Kenya, for instance, would severely have to be taken into account. For one, I do not think that a military coup in Kenya is imminent, but for other countries, I'm actually not so sure. But I still believe that it is better to take each case independently.
All right, another major topic I want to speak on is Ethiopia. After 2 years of war, it seems battlefield dynamics have fluctuated. Tigrayan leaders have dropped a key condition for talks, namely that Amhara forces leave disputed areas they seized in western Tigray. How optimistic are you for an end to this war this year?
The Ethiopian conflict has snowballed into from a war of attrition between the federal government of Ethiopia and the Tigray People's Liberation Force into a war between a warring ethnic factions. It is also very important to state that the areas that were occupied in Amhara region by the TPLF were previously under TPLF control. And so when the war broke out between the federal government and the TPLF in September 2020, the Amhara forces combined with the federal government to take back those territories. And I think it is going to be, if there is any form of peace agreement between the major warring faction, which are the TPLF and the Ethiopian federal government, and the withdrawal of TPLF forces from those areas in Amhara will be a key contentious issue that may actually prolong the war further than it should have lasted.
On a final note, what else do you think is in store for Africa in 2022? What should we look out for?
Yeah, in the economic front, I usually refer to the economy because a lot of our security challenges on the continent is much more the product of terrible economic situations. And so if we continue to see the growth that many African youths in the fintech space continue to do, I think it's going to be, it will help a lot in alleviating some of the issues that lead young people to joining armed groups across the Sahel, as we've seen.
All right, then, Confidence Makhari, Security and Global Affairs Analyst, thank you so much for your time on Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you for having me.
And now 2021 was no doubt another tough year, but good things did happen. As we wrap up the program, here are some top foreign policy related good news stories that could bring even more good news in 2022 and beyond.
On February 15, the World Trade Organization chose former Nigerian Finance Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to become the first woman and first African to lead the organization.
I remain honored and humbled by the confidence members have placed in me. I'll bring all my knowledge, passion, experience, and persistence to the task at hand, reforming the organization and achieving results.
In October, the World Health Organization, WHO, approved the use of Mosquirix, the first ever malaria vaccine for children. Developing a malaria vaccine has been a long-standing scientific challenge. Mosquirix has been under development since 1987.
This long-awaited malaria vaccine is a breakthrough for science, child health, and malaria control. Using this vaccine in addition to existing tools to prevent malaria could save tens of thousands of young lives each year.
On November 28, Hondurans elected their first woman president, Xiomara Castro. The former First Lady had 53% of the votes and Asfura 34%, with 52% of the tallies counted, according to the National Electoral Council. And finally, historians may look back on 2021 as the year that opened the era of space tourism. In 2021 alone, 22 non-astronauts traveled to space using the leading space tourism companies Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin, Richard Branson's Virgin Atlantic, and Elon Musk's SpaceX.
And that's the program today. Once more, a Happy New Year to you. I'm Teniola Shoboale. Bye for now.